Chapter 19. There was snow covering the ground of the Azkaban courtyard, but, for some reason, even snow lost its charm and purity there. Where the inmates had walked in their yard time was only a grey mush, and where it lay untouched only increased the sense of emptiness of the place. Cold was biting. Many of the people imprisoned there, if already weak, didn't survive the winter. Most of the cells were not much warmer than the outside, and surely damper. A humidity that penetrated right in the bones. Despite the chill, him and Ernest were sitting on a bench both looking at the main door, where the guard had disappeared with their new guest. His trip with the inferi guy had been silent. Usually there was never much talking. Sourness at having been captured and a sense of foreboding at the idea of entering Azkaban typically left the unfortunate wizard wordless. Harry was never too inclined on speaking either, especially after a capture so much felt as this one. His contempt prevented him speaking. Only before being taken away, the wizard had met Harry's eyes. "I'll be out, and you will be the first one to pay," he murmured threateningly. Harry didn't even answer. It wasn't the first time he received this kind of menace on a capture, and they never bothered him much. This made no exception. He watched the guy being taken away. Judging by his constitution, it was already a miracle if he survived the winter. He was the one who was going to pay, he thought somewhat pitifully, and dearly. Harry, in an hour or so, would have been in his warm house, in a comfortable bed, and in a few days on the beach in Australia with his wife. No, it's not me, the one is going to pay. Azkaban was a dreadful place that always left him wary, and that day more than ever. Only the thought of the bed waiting for him sustained him. He had received a firm order from Elizabeth not to show up in the office again for that day and to go home to catch up with some sleep. While dozing on the sofa, an hour before, he was having a nice dream, but the sound of a quill scratching on a paper woke him with a sudden jolt. "What time is it? How long did he sleep?" he asked alarmed to Elizabeth, sprinting up, realizing only at that moment he had fallen asleep. She looked up and smiled. She was sitting on his desk, filling some more forms. "Don't worry, only about 20 minutes. I didn't find it hard to wake you up," she said serenely, carrying on with her scribbling. It was then that she gave him the order of repose to which he had been forced when acquiescence. He lingered on the sofa still a while, the scratching on paper accompanying pleasantly his musing. The dream he was having left him a good feeling. He tried to recall it, but it was gone. Only a sensation of warmth and brightness was left. When the unpleasant task of securing the wizard to prison had been fulfilled, Ernest suggested to get a cup of coffee together, at which he agreed, wishing for a chat. They both had a fuming cup in their hands that was fond of cooling down very quickly if they didn't hurry to drink it. They exchanged tidings of their respective families, and now, watching the closed door, they were both lost in their consideration. "Things must change," Ernest said after a while. "What do you mean?" Ernest's brows knitted together, and his expression darkened. "Here, I mean. The situation is getting ungovernable. We have too many inmates. We struggle to control them." Harry was silent for a moment. "Many will be dead by the end of the winter," he said in the end. It was not exactly a happy thing to affirm, but that didn't make it less true. "Yesterday a boy died. We found him frozen to death in his cell, all crouched on himself in a corner trying to stay warm. He wasn't even 20. This cannot be right. Harry didn't answer. Ernest had too much heart to work in a place as such. He couldn't have done it either. None of the two had enough fibre for it. Harry was sorry for him. He had always liked the guy, and felt pity, knowing he was spending every day in that place. He had suggested him more than once to change job. He had even considered to speak his name to the minister, against his usual inclination as the man deserved it all, but he always refused. In Azkaban, the salary was much higher than any other place, and he needed those money to support his family where he was the only one working. Nevertheless, Harry had noticed him aging fast. The lines more marked on his face. He was losing the openness and cheerfulness that characterized him when they first met. I would prefer to see them decreasing in a different way. This is only heightening the resentment. There are fights every other day, and we are just not enough to control them, he concluded worriedly, sitting back on the bench. We asked for some help, but they are not sending any. It's month we are understaffed. This is a dangerous game they are playing at. Harry reflected on his words. He was right. It was a dangerous game. The ministry was always unwilling to dispense additional money for a place like Azkaban. That was another reason why the place was so dismal. It was very expensive to keep, and it had become even more so after the Dementors had been banned. Guards needed to be paid adequately, while formerly Dementors weren't, working only for the sake of feeding on the spare of inmates. Moreover, prisoners needed to be fed, and without the mentors they were surviving longer, despite the dreadful living condition, contributing to the overcrowding. And the return was null. Many people in the magical community weren't very happy to know their money was used for the keeping of criminals. Therefore, expenses were kept at minimum, and requests of changes or improvement ignored. Harry had mixed feeling toward the issue. On one side, he thought that most of the wizards imprisoned there deserved it all. On the other, he was reminded when Hagrid had been there in his second year because believed to be culpable of the attacks on students. He hadn't had any fault in it, and the experience had greatly shaken him. He remembered about Sirius as well, who had even worse experience out of it. And then he was reminded again about what Ted told him once. If they come out even worse. I'll talk to the minister about it, he said, emptying his cup in one gulp. The now tepid drink going pleasantly down his throat. I'll see what I can do. Ernest's brow eased, and after a few minutes of silence, with a lighter tone, addressed him again. So, going to Australia? Harry was bemused. How'd you know? I heard Ellen and Diana talking about it. We do the night shift together time to time. They were discussing a magazine, I believe. A friend of yours is marrying there, isn't he? Harry couldn't stop the annoyance being clearly visible on his face, and Ernest, spotting it, chuckled. If that make you feel better, the discussion was adorned by many interesting remarks on the sensation created by your person wearing a swimsuit, which I don't want to know. Thank you. He tailed him off quickly, already starting to feel rather hot around the neck, while Ernest burst out laughing. And yes, hopefully I'm going. I'll be off as soon as I can. I'll tell them then, so they'll buy the next number for sure, Ernest boomed in a fit of mirth. Harry was sitting on the bed, contemplating a big luggage almost empty in front of him. He was wondering why Ginny's one was full to the brim, rendering it necessary for him to help her closing it, and his, after having put inside all he could think of, was still basically empty. He had been tempted to call her to be enlightened of what he was forgetting. If only, doing a quick calculation, he realized it was very early in the morning there, and surely she was still sleeping. He was on his own. He looked inside. 3 t-shirts, one pair of jeans, one trunk for daywear, and one for swimming, some pants and socks, running shoes, a pair of sunglasses, and a toothbrush. It barely lay at the bottom. He scratched his head, reflecting. Usually, it was always Ginny managing these kind of things. Like it was always her buying clothes for him. He loved to pick nice things for her and Sunrise, but he didn't care at all about what to wear himself. Clothes were magically materializing in his wardrobe, and Ginny, to avoid him always wearing the same stuff, sometimes even arranged them on his bedside table in the morning. He stood up and lazily fished from the wardrobe a hoodie, hoping not to have the need to use it, and an additional t-shirt. It was still dismally empty. After some more consideration, he took a rucksack and, emptying the luggage, stuffed everything in that one. It filled perfectly. Problem solved. He took a book found in one of his explorations in Nocturnal Alley about a vicious branch of dark magic he wanted to be better informed, and left behind, with much satisfaction, a very boring scientific one about the inferi he was reading. The small box containing the ring was still on the bedside table. The purchase hadn't been as easy as he thought it would have been. To start with, there were hundreds of models, and Ginny never wore any jewelry, rendering it difficult for him to imagine what she might like. In the end, the girl behind the counter had helped him. "If she never wears any, you should get something simple." And so he had done. He had chosen something simple and easy, something that reminded him of her. But then he found out rings had sizes, a bit like shoes, a thing he should have imagined but never crossed his mind. Frustration growing, he didn't know where to turn for help. In the end, despite unwillingly, he asked Molly, who furnished him with a more than enthusiastic help. He only hoped her enthusiasm wouldn't have made her spill the beans, caring for the whole thing to remain a surprise. He took the box and stuffed it in the bag. As he was considering that maybe he ought to pack Flip-Flop too, and, throwing him in a sudden fit of panic, something for the wedding, an acute scream pierced the air. Harry left the rucksack still open beside the door and followed the scream, knowing already what was about. He switched on the light in Sunrise's room. He had been to pick her up that day from the barrow, to spend a bit of time in her company before leaving. He found her crying, clutching her teddy convulsively. "What's wrong, sweetie? Another nightmare?" "Daddy!" she wailed, seeing him. He picked her up and kissed her hair. "Did you dream about the Batman again?" he asked, consoling her. "Yes, Daddy, he hurt you." Harry, taking her to his room, thought about what the inferi guy had told him as parting. He was going to die in Azkaban. There wasn't any risk of him hurting anybody anymore. "No, sweetie, the Batman is in prison." "In prison?" she asked tearfully. "Yes, bad men always go to prison, and they never get out. You can sleep tight. He cannot hurt me," he said reassuringly, lying her in his bed under the duvet. "And Mommy?" "Nor Mommy, she's safe too," he added, lying close to her and switching off the light. "Where is Mommy?" "At the sea." "At the sea?" she asked excitedly. "Yes, I'm going there too soon. We need to make everything ready for this summer, you know, for when we will go with Jamie and Albie. That's why you will have to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. You will be a good girl while we are away, are you? If you do, we will go all together at summertime." "And the bad man?" "The bad man will stay in prison forever. No sea for him. He hasn't been good. Only good girls get to go to the sea." "I'm a good girl," she said steadfast. Harry smiled and yawned. "I know you are. Now you'll show it to Daddy, going to sleep straight away. All right?" "All right, Daddy." He kept her close, knowing already he was going to be hard to leave her to the burrow the next day. The repetition of Teddy that Marty's waking hours was going to be missed intensely. But then he thought about the blue sky that was waiting for him, the crystalline water, the white sand, and Ginny, wearing her fetching swimsuit, coming toward him, and consoled himself somehow. And just when the reverie was losing shape into a dream, Sunrise's voice startled him up, making his heart jolt. "Daddy?" "What, sweetie?"
"You give Daddy a kiss?"
Chapter 20. Reflection in the foeglass. The next day everything was ready, the rucksack nicely filled, and Sunrise already at the burrow. The wedding was in the afternoon, so he couldn't fly as he was hoping for. He had no choice but to use flow powder. He hated the idea, as it was as good as informing publicly of his departure, but he hadn't any other choice. Once there, he would have found a way to make his traces disappear. Ginny had been over the moon at being informed of Harry's success, and he could hardly wait to be finally there. Having enough time, he decided to pop briefly to the ministry to give the last instruction and make sure everything was in order before his departure. He took the rucksack with the idea of leaving using the fire over there. The department was quiet and almost empty, all hours being out on some business or other. Elizabeth was there, however, and seeing his rucksack, smiled complacently. He smiled back without proffering a word and went to his office to ultimate a report on the infantry capture he was working on to keep in the ministry archive. As he was writing, something got caught in the corner of his eye. He looked up from the paper he was filling and frowned. Slowly, keeping his eyes on what seemed so unusual, stood up and went to the other side of the room. He sat on the sofa armset, the only available space to sit on as it was covered with files, and stared in the foeglass. They had 3 in the department, and 1 was stationary in his office. Harry never looked in it, however. He had made so many enemies during his life that it was usually a confusion of shapes and shadows, impossible to make anything out of it. But this time, standing out from shadows, whizzing on the background, there was a face, as clear as a picture, so definite he was scary. This face, who was staring at him, was long and careworn, with long greasy hair and an overgrown beard. Dark shadows were around his eyes, and the expression of the face was everything but benevolent. Harry didn't recognize it in the least, and was trying to make out the meaning of it all when Elizabeth strode into his office.
"Harry, I've got Godwin at the fire. He's calling from Azkaban. I think there are some problems. Can you come?"
Albeit unwillingly, glancing perplexed the last time in the glass, he followed Elizabeth. He was starting to feel a twinge of uneasiness, and wanted to observe that face some more to try to bring something on surface from his mind. But the tone in which she had uttered the request marked the call an urgent one, not to be trifled over. Ernest's face in the fire was bleak, revealing straight away he had been right in his hunch. "What's going on?" he asked, sitting down. "We had a breakout."
"What?"
Harry boomed.
He couldn't believe his ears, and for a moment he thought to have misunderstood. Nobody ever escaped from Azkaban. It was impossible. Spells everywhere, guards at every corner, prisoners within sight constantly. It was just impossible. Although Ernest's expression didn't leave place to misconception.
"How can that be?" he exclaimed aghast. "Who is it?"
"Prisoner number 0125-9364-L854.
Ernest answered grim. "It's happened yesterday."
"Yesterday?"
Harry almost shouted enraged.
"And are you telling me now?"
"We only found out today,
An hour ago, Ernest said as an explanation, during a yard time, a scrape broke out, a massive one. It took us the whole evening to tame it and bring everything back in cell. 7 prisoners needed an healer, 2 died stomped to death, 3 guards injured, and as usual, we were short on staff. It has been mayhem for hours. A guard went missing, and this morning had been found dead in a cupboard without uniform and wand. At the same time, Johnson informed me 854 was missing. They found his cell empty, serving breakfast. Shit! How the fuck is possible that his absence went unnoticed for more than 12 solid hours? I'm in the dark as you are, he answered. His face in the fire couldn't hide his concern. The only thing I know is that the guy was as good as invisible. When I saw the picture, I couldn't even understand who the hell he was. Nobody remembered him, or having ever talked to him. Never had any trouble, a blank record, and it has been here for more than 10 years, he exclaimed, losing a bit the composure kept until that moment. Nobody ever heard a peep from him. Harry was flabbergasted, but maintained his wits about him, his brain already reeling furiously on the next step to take. He couldn't be treated lightly. They had to intervene immediately and massively. Too many precious hours had been lost already, and if the guy had been there for 10 years already, surely it wasn't for pickpocketing. What's the felony? He was a Death Eater. The conversation didn't prolong itself much longer after that. Harry had all the information he needed. Elizabeth was tailing him while he was pelting her with instructions, a quill following them, writing everything on a parchment. I want everybody back. Everybody that is not on a case of life and death must be here in half an hour, he ordered stern. I want the minister informed. The Daily Prophet must be informed without delay also. I'll do that. Elizabeth was already disappearing hurriedly behind the corner to carry out all what she asked when Harry stopped her. When she turned inquiringly, he looked down and, without meeting her gaze, said somewhat hesitantly, Would you be so kind to call Ginny for me when you are done with the rest? Tell her I won't be able to make it. And as she was nodding, ready to march out, he added, Perhaps it would be wise to keep some distance from the fire when you tell her. He cleared his voice uneasy. A step or 2, just to be on the safe side. Elizabeth smiled. Don't worry, I'll explain her it's not your fault. You don't know my wife? Harry thought privately. He was quite cowardly to let Elizabeth handle it. Harry was aware of it, but he didn't have the time to manage it himself, considering it couldn't possibly be a short or easy call to do. He calculated mentally that this affront was going to cost him dearly indeed. At least 1 week of reproachful silence for the missed wedding, adding another week for having delegated Elizabeth for the call, and probably an additional week because, unless of a miracle, the 2 weeks trip was cancelled likewise. Let's round it all up, and it was a full month of icy cold vibes and pointed neglect. He was going to take endless efforts in every direction to overcome it. But he couldn't be helped. He was unthinkable to leave the country with the Death Eater at large. Percy wasn't at all surprised to hear from him. I was expecting your call. I might as well inform you that those reporters were freelance, not sent by the Daily Prophet. We have some more important matter to divulge to the magical community than your whereabouts, he said pompously without looking up, concentrated on writing something on an official-looking parchment. And if you don't mind, I'm quite busy, late on my daily schedule, no time for petty complaint. Percy, I don't know what you are talking about. I'm in my office. I need to inform you about a serious matter. Percy raised his eyes on him and put down the quill. I thought you were already on your way. 1 or 2 reporters told us they saw you at the Emirates border not long ago. He rolled his eyes and nerved. It's almost impossible to get reliable information these days. This is just unacceptable. I won't tolerate the spreading of fake news. I already told Mom you were on your way.
I was about to be on my way, but I've been prevented. There has been a breakout from Azkaban, a Death Eater. I want the press being informed. His picture printed. He must be captured as soon as possible.
Percy sprang to attention, putting aside the official-looking parchment and getting a new one. Of course, Harry! Straight away! We can have a special edition printed in a matter of hours if needed.
Cheers. I'll talk to the minister. I'm sure he will agree with me on the necessity of it. I'll look over for the file and I'll send the picture over ASAP.
He continued, giving him the few details already in his possession, and left him busy taking note furiously with one hand and throwing some flue powder in the nearby fireplace with the other, shouting a name. Harry, on the other side, as busy as Percy, was damning for the first time the impenetrable mess of his office. He had an accurate idea of every single file in there, but with only the prisoner number, it wasn't going to be an easy research. Especially because what he was looking for was 10 years old. He was already head of department back then, and that made the job easier. At least it was him who had filed it. However, he had done so many reports on Death Eater that it was impossible for him to understand which one it was only by the number. It took him 20 full minutes to find it, buried under years and years of more or less serious misdemeanors. And when, sat on the floor amid papers scattered everywhere, he finally opened it, the picture struck him. At first he wasn't sure why. He stared for some time, trying to understand why there was an unpleasant sensation creeping on him. But as Elizabeth strode again in his office, "Harry, everybody's here, and the minister wants to talk to you," a new, horrible notion made its way. He didn't give any sign to have heard her. He only raised his eyes, slowly, to the foeglass. The same face, 10 years older, was staring at him with a smirk.